Last week, the Czech plan to get more ammunition for Ukraine gained significant traction at a leaders' summit in Paris. Poland was facing continued protests by farmers on its eastern border and is considering shutting the border temporarily. And the Visegrad Group leaders struggled to hide their disagreements as they met in Prague to discuss the formation's future. I am Jan with Prague Pulse, and this is your weekly briefing from the heart of Europe. On Monday, leaders of 20 EU member states met at a summit in Paris to discuss how to best support and arm Ukraine in its continuing fight against the Russian aggression. The high-level gathering came as Ukraine faces an ammunition gap on the front line and uncertainty over fickle Western support, with a $60 billion US aid package still blocked in Congress. Ukrainian President Zelensky recently claimed that of the 1 million artillery shells promised by Europe last year, only around 30% have been delivered. Ukraine's defense ministry also stated that half of the West's commitments on military gear to Ukraine do not arrive on time. At the Paris summit, leaders have agreed to team up and buy the urgently needed ammunition for Ukraine together. Specifically, they have supported a recent initiative by Czechia. Czech President Petr Pavel has said that the country had identified more than 800,000 units of shells in unspecified non-EU countries, which can be bought almost immediately and transferred to Ukraine at a short notice. At the summit, most of the leaders agreed to finance the Czech brokered plan together, and also agreed to come up with additional suggestions on how to best support Kiev. The leaders are expected to reconvene within the next few days. In addition, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has hinted at an EU plan to use the profits from frozen Russian assets to jointly buy ammunition for Ukraine. Insiders have hinted that a specific plan could be introduced as early as in 2 weeks. The hope is that, together with the plan by Czechia, this influx of ammunition would help Ukraine stabilize the front and potentially even plan for new offensive operations. Poland has reportedly been in talks with Ukraine over temporarily closing its border between the two countries amidst an ongoing blockade by protesting farmers, said Polish PM Donald Tusk. This follows weeks of protests by Polish farmers over the imports of Ukrainian agriculture products into the EU. Last year, as a response to Russia's continuing aggression against Ukraine and its blockade of the Black Sea, the EU sought alternative ways to help Ukraine export its agricultural products. As a response, the EU decided to temporarily lift import tariffs on Ukrainian goods. EU farmers now claim that this has flooded the EU single market with generally cheaper Ukrainian products, which reportedly puts EU farmers into an unfair disadvantage. The claim is that Ukrainian produce is cheaper, among others, because Ukraine does not have to abide by the EU's strict health standards, given that the country is not yet an EU member itself, and so the regulations do not apply to it. Yet, Ukraine's goods are now free to enter the EU single market. Officially, Ukrainian products are only allowed to transit through the EU single market and are intended for export to non-EU countries, which the Ukrainian government says it respects. Polish farmers, on the other hand, fear that the temporary lifting of tariffs is being exploited by Ukraine to actually sell its cheaper products inside the EU. In protests, Polish farmers have now blocked border crossings to Ukraine and have dumped some 160 tons of Ukrainian grain bound for export. Unsurprisingly, some of those protests have turned anti-Ukrainian in nature and pro-Russian, which leads to fears that the Kremlin is using them for propaganda purposes, or even actively fueling them. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk says that Poland remains a steadfast ally of Ukraine in its fight against Russia. Still, he maintains that the EU's single market needs to be protected and that negative effects of any measure designed to help Ukraine needs to be rectified. Apparently, temporarily shutting the border between Poland and Ukraine has now been considered as one of the solutions. The Ukrainian side, however, denies any such considerations are being discussed. Leaders of the so-called Visegrad Group, which consists of Czechia, Slovakia, Poland and Hungary, met for a high-level summit in Prague. The group, which was originally established to enhance political cooperation between the four Central European countries due to their largely shared histories and similar social values, has been facing significant strains recently. This has been mainly caused by the vastly different views of the Visegrad countries on the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Czechia and Poland have been amongst the strongest supporters of Ukraine, both diplomatically and also militarily. They have been amongst the very first countries to send weapons to Ukraine, including heavy weapons, at the start of the war, and have pushed the rest of the EU to increase their own support of Ukraine. Hungary, on the other hand, has maintained that it would not at all support Ukraine militarily. It has even refused to allow any transit of military aid through its territory. As we've explained in one of our previous videos, Hungary's leader, Viktor Orbán, has until recently been the only EU leader to maintain warm relations to Russia. Orbán even personally met Putin last year. Slovakia has now joined Hungary as a country cozying up to Russia. Slovakia's new Prime Minister, Robert Fico, has repeatedly spread Kremlin propaganda about the war against Ukraine, as we've also covered before. Just last week, he again repeated the lie that the war had been started by Ukraine's Nazis and that the West is merely trying to demonize Putin. That was why finding any sort of a common ground at the Visegrad summit was very difficult. Polish PM Tusk even questioned whether continued cooperation in the Visegrad format is still worth it. After the meeting, commentators noticed a rather staged performance by the leaders, who themselves admitted that they could not agree on much. The only thing that they all did agree on was that the Russian invasion has been a gross violation of international law, which is basically the bare minimum. While the leaders did agree to continue the Visegrad Group meetings as such, it is clear that, given the disagreements, it now lacks any real substance. Remember, originally the Visegrad Group was created to help the member countries join the EU and NATO. With that goal now accomplished, the main stated reason for preserving it has been the claim that together the countries can produce significant voting power in the EU and either push through proposals of their own or block proposals they do not like. But without agreement on even the most basic and pressing issues of today, that seems very unlikely now.